Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar about risk assessment and crisis management. I'm very happy to welcome our three VIP guests, Melissa Agnes, David Rubens, and Neil Marshall. I see that we have people from Peru, United States, Macedonia, France, Romania. So thank you for joining. Joyce, Yonut, Sonia, Sandrine. We have Jill with us. It's really great to have you there. Welcome to everyone. And I will add our precious guest to the list. Hello, Melissa. Hello, Neil. Hello, David.
Hi there. Morning, Bruno.
Really great to have you. So we are here for around 45 minutes to talk about a topic that is common for the four of us. And as I was telling you before, we have something in common, is that all of us like to share our knowledge and are engaged in training, explaining, assessing, helping others. And when I met the three of you in different timelines, it really struck me that this engagement that you show. So I will start by presenting our guest. First, Melissa. So Melissa, hello, hi.
Hello, hello.
Melissa is the founder and CEO of the Crisis Ready Institute. She's a recognized leading authority on crisis preparedness, reputation management, and brand protection. Creator of the Crisis Ready model. She will probably talk about that. And author of a great book, which is Crisis Ready, Building an Invincible Brand in an Uncertain World. She's a speaker, commentator, advisor for some of today's leading organizations faced with the greatest risks. She teaches crisis management in university courses around the world, including at the NYU, Columbia, McGill, and her book and her model are recognized globally, so having elevated industry best practice and are currently taught in dozens of higher education courses. She sits on several panels, and I'm sure she doesn't only sit there, but also contributes largely. Developing the international standard for crisis management guideline for developing a strategic capability. That's interesting because we will mention some of the ISO standards today. On the Police Professional Standards Ethic and Image Committee, and also the Global Advisory Council for the Institute for Strategic Risk Management, ISRM, and David is the Executive Director of it. And so he will talk about it. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you for having me.
So Neil now. Neil, welcome, Neil. Neil is Managing Director at Gov Consulting International and LLC, and works with select global clients in the food and beverage sector. He's an experienced and commercially aware technical leader. He worked 30 years in the FMCG food industry in Europe, USA, with experience in the emerging markets. And at the end of 2020, Neil retired from the role as Global Director Quality and Food Safety at the Coca-Cola after 21 years. And that's how we met. Neil, you've had a variety of technical supply chain roles during all your career. You build a corporate quality and food safety team. You have led the introduction of GFSI compliance across more than 1,000 plants and 5,000 suppliers, and gain experience in crisis management, merger and acquisition, risk assessment, supplier management, technical governance, and public-private partnership. Impressive. I thought I was international, but after Melissa, now Neil, who has worked over 80 countries in every continent, global technical lead for the 2028 Beijing Olympics, the 2010 South Africa World Cup, and the 2012 London Olympics. You have been also a long-serving member of GFSI and president of SSafe, which contributes also to the improvement of food safety all around the world. So welcome, welcome, Neil. Great to have you here.
Thank you. And all those experiences, helped to shape my career, particularly in crisis management. So we'll talk about that later, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you very much, Neil. And last but not least, Dr. David Rubens, you're Executive Director of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management. You established your first consultancy in '92 in London. You're a chartered security professional, and you have served 2 terms as the main board director of the UK Security Institute. You hold a doctorate in security and risk management from the University of Portsmouth, and your thesis exploring the non-hierarchical models of strategic management at the extremes of organizational complexity. So that says a lot. You have been a member of the UK Black Sky Black Start program, looking at development of multidisciplinary framework. That's, I think, the multidisciplinary is important in our field, from theoretical modeling and creation of practical responses within a UK context for a Black Sky Black Start extending critical national infrastructure failure. And you are currently member of the National Preparedness Commission under Lord Toby Harris. What's also impressive is that after a lot of training around the world, in particular since the COVID-19 lockdown, and that's how we met, you have developed a series of webinars run in partnership with Emirate Groups, and you have delivered it to over 9,000 participants all over the world. So, wow.
Yes, well.
Impressive. And I think I will see at the end of the presentation, but it's not ending there. So it's continuing. I follow one of these courses, and yeah, I can really recommend it. So you have created the Institute of Strategic Risk Management in October 28, which has become a major institute in the sector with international chapters in 16 countries across Asia, Middle East, Australasia, US, Eastern Europe, the network of academic research and think tank institution. And I am proud to have integrated this network as chair of the French chapter.
And we're delighted, Bruno, to have you as chair of the French chapter. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, the 3 of you to be there. So we will start with some presentations, topic presentation, of course, and we then will go to panel sessions at each time after each of these sessions. Let me share my screen. And we can start with the presentation, I hope. So, indeed, we're going to talk about risk today. And I have looked at the different risk maps and that have been reported in the last weeks, actually. One of the references is the Global Risk Reports, and the World Economic Forum has just released it, and it's a report done after a survey of different, of course, companies, CEO all around the world, part of the World Economic Forum. And what we can say indeed is that you can see in October 2019, we had infectious disease near food crisis, by the way, as something which had a big impact, but rather low likelihood to appear. And of course, by what we have learned, I don't know if it's predictive for 2021 or just the fact after the pandemic that we are still living through, is that indeed this infectious disease and the pandemic has become, of course, on the top of the radar in terms of risk for the companies. Recently, also the Allianz Risk Barometer was released, And in this risk map, we see that business interruption, pandemic outbreak are in the top 2 of the risks that are followed by the insurance company. As number 3 are the cyber incidents, then market developments, and number 5 that I will mention is changes in legislation and regulations, because that's also something that is particularly important for the food industry. In the food chain that is global, there are of course a lot of actors that are international, with a lot of intermediaries and a lot of risk in relation to food safety, food fraud, food defense, and all kinds of supply chain disruptions. And if we look at the map of all the risk that concern all the companies, but in particular food industries, of course, around the strategic risk of the company related to the governance and the business model that is chosen, you have all the operational risk, and I will mention here, of course, all what is related to suppliers, supply chain, customers in particular. You have all what is related to health risk that we know, foodborne disease, contamination, also the pandemic, and some of them may have an impact on food. There are also criminal risks that are involved. We've talked about cyber crime in this overview of risk, but we have also food crime and food fraud or food defense risk that are relevant for our industry. As well as, of course, regulatory risk and brand image risk, which can be related to how you communicate, and I think we will talk about it during crisis or issues, and also, of course, the different management practices that you have. So, my question to our great panel, and I will come back to our panel, heading to the screen. Okay, hello there. So my first question would be to David, because you're working in this strategic risk management. We've seen that there are a lot of different risks that a company has to face, and they are very often managed by different experts. So which advice would you give in order to better integrate this risk assessment into the company strategy?
Oh, that's simple, and I can give an answer that I'm sure that Melissa and Neil will agree with. You need a consultant. You need a consultant, I think, preferably one with a doctorate. I have to add that, but I don't think anybody would disagree with that. We laugh, but actually, you bring in somebody from the outside. When I go, I'm sure Melissa's the same and Neil's the same. When I go work with organizations, I speak to the security and risk managers, and I say, right, what do I need to tell these guys? Because they know there's no magic to this. There's no magic to this, Bruno. There's, the people in the organization, they know what to do. It's to get it done. So I think that in terms of what we need to do, really, the answer is, it starts always with culture. You've got to get the culture right. You've got to get your fundamental beliefs right. And if fundamentally you believe, you spoke about us sharing, but if fundamentally you believe that we should be integrative and we should share information and we should be supportive, you have a good starting point. And if you don't believe that, then all of the processes and protocols in the world will not help you. And of course, the beauty about that is it doesn't cost money. It is about changing of an attitude, opening up. And of course, the beautiful thing is that if you do that, you gain benefits. If you are integrative and you are collaborative and you are supportive and you share information, things become better for you. So that would be my starting point. We understand. Of course, you then have to understand the technical sides of risk, which you have to do. But if you get your fundamental underlying culture correct, you're in a good starting position.
So I see your point. Thank you, David. About it starts with culture, and
I mean,
sometimes with consultants.
Stan McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, who's a good friend of the ISRM and is very, very well known, has this thing about culture eats strategy and tactics. It doesn't matter what your strategy and tactics are if your culture's misaligned.
Got you. Neil, in your experience, which kind of risk assessment tools a company could use or can use in order to have some light in these many risks that they have to face?
Yeah, I think there's several out there, but it's interesting that David mentions culture, as we know, because we're heavily involved in that and have been for a while now, really in the food safety space. But I think collaboration, open sharing is critical, but things that scan the horizon for new risks. So that's what we would particularly have used in my old role in Coke. I can give a few names of companies that do that, but really collecting the information from outside your own company. So horizon scanning, looking at RASIF, looking at the FDA recalls, look at import alerts. There's a company called Food Akai who have a scanning system like that, and there's others that are similar, that are collecting that information for you, bringing it inside, so that then you can use that as an input for your risk assessment process. What I've also found and can see from talking to companies, nobody has it really fully automated, or very few companies. So the whole risk assessment process, particularly around food safety and quality technical risks, are not really very well automated, like a lot of the things in the food industry. It needs digitizing, it needs automating to simplify, to make sure that people don't miss things. And one of the, I think we've talked about it before, Bruno, one of the big things is, I call it, it's my British Yorkshire phrase, seeing round corners. How do I see round corners to know what's going to happen before it's already hit me? And all the incidents that I've ever been involved in is really when we've not known about something that happened maybe one or two steps back up the supply chain, where somebody changed the process, somebody changed something inadvertently that didn't understand the risk further on. So having those tools, inputs to look beyond your internal consumer complaints, customer feedback, supplier assessments, but scanning outside of your own company is critical. I think a lot of the smaller companies maybe don't have that resource and time to get your head up, look, stand back, and go get the information, because usually someone's had the same problem before somewhere else and it's just repeated. We can talk about that, I'm sure, as well. So looking outside your own four walls of your own business and then communicating that internally, collaborating, as David said, to drive that change in culture and understanding of risk. And that's critical.
So thank you very much. And so horizon scanning, also be aware of all these changes and all the risk within the supply chain. Thank you for that. And just to come to you, Melissa, do you see all the topics also important in this risk assessment to improve the crisis readiness of the organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of bring together what both David and Neil have said, yes, crisis readiness is cultural. It's absolutely cultural. It needs to be cultural. That means that it's cross-organizational. That means that it's cross-collaborative. It also means that, culture is led top-down, supported bottom-up. So it's the right mindset that leadership is leading with. To Neil's point, one of the things that I see right now is that organizations, even if they want to scan the horizon, they can't, because everybody is kind of still in that crisis mode and they're looking at what they need to do today, tomorrow, and next week versus in 3 months, or where all of the places that the world might go to that are unknown right now. So to David's point, having a consultant or having a network, again, to Neil's point on looking outside of your organization, having a network of peers and colleagues and experts that have different experiences and lenses to yours, but somebody said it, that everybody is kind of experiencing the same things on a baseline. So you feel very isolated, you feel very alone, but opening up that network, you realize that you aren't, and that cross collaboration can expand beyond the internal of your organization, which also speaks to culture, having a culture that's open to doing that. those are some things that right now organizations, leaders, professionals are needing, because their heads are down and they're focused on the here and now. They have to be. They're still in that crisis management mode. So in order to scan that horizon, go outside and have that collaborative mindset to expand your capabilities and your crisis readiness.
It's great. The collaborative mindset is a great addition to the culture that we have. Okay.
It's a necessity, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about crisis now. So we have assessed the risk, but crises arrive, of course. And the different steps that we very often see, or that I think that we will agree on. There is this before the crisis, where we talk, I guess, about the importance of preparation. Then something happens. We call it an incident, and that's something also that we can discuss, and that very often we call the incident the crisis, but we can see that not all incidents are crises, and that's why we need this moment of alert based of some information that we have in order to escalate this to the crisis and to be in crisis mode with different ways of handling it, and depending, of course, on what we do, that's when we will be better in this crisis management. We have to listen to the different signs, and when I was doing these courses, or following these courses with David, it struck me that something that David said, that actually crises never happen by accident. There are always warning. There are always these weak signals, and indeed, when you look at most of the crises, you study crisis report, accidents report, you see very often that there are sometimes during months, years, these weak signals, or things that the company is struggling with, compromise which are done. So people are accepting way of working which we know are not optimal, and then an incident happens that makes it a bigger thing, and the crisis. And one topic that we'll discuss that we'll discuss later, but that for me was also a key learning, is that the incident doesn't make the crisis. It's the way that you react to it that makes it, right? And even if I was shocked the first time that David said, no, COVID is not a crisis, it's an incident. The crisis is the lockdown, right, David? It's one of the topics that we mentioned. In the food industry, in the last 30 years, we've gone through a lot of crises, and we go every year. And for me, also in my career, it started with the BSE or ESB, and the dioxin, different contaminations, different additives which were added, fraud issues with melamine, different contamination of produce. We had, of course, the very big scandal about the horse meat scandal. It goes all across, I would say, the industry, with sometimes animals in between, like avian flu, and somehow our COVID related crisis is also related to animals, and is also somehow happened or started in a food market. So it's also somehow food related. And also to mention one of them, which for me is quite interesting, is the strawberry crisis in Australia, where a lady, I believe, put needles in strawberries, and somehow this stopped all the industry, because someone at the governmental level said, stop eating strawberries, because there were 4 or 5 strawberries with needles that had been found in some markets. So are there do's and don'ts of the in terms of crisis management? I've summarized some. We'll talk again, and I think we'll finish probably with that. To be prepared, know how to escalate from incident to crisis. Communication, of course, is very important, and we need to be able to show empathy. Decide based on facts. Be transparent and tell the truth. And that's sometimes something that is missing in the way people at the highest level of states react. Choose a well-prepared and trained spokesperson. Be sincere. A Japanese colleague and friend and in a company, they say sincerity and promptness in the way we should react to food issues. And the don'ts, it's not don't be silent. Don't lie, seems obvious. Don't make promises that you cannot keep. Don't be overreactive. Do not let untrained people become spokesperson. And especially, I think the experts are sometimes very dangerous when an expert talks in terms of crisis. And don't neglect business activities, and don't improvise, of course, in this kind of situations. And indeed, if we look a little bit at the pandemic in terms of preparation and reaction, we cannot say that there were no before. For pandemics in the 20th and 21st century, there have been a lot of them. So it's not something that started from nothing. There is this great TED talk from Bill Gates about after the Ebola crisis, how we should be prepared for this kind of pandemic. And in my opinion, unfortunately, we are not there yet. I mean, we see that today the way we have handled it from the French perspective, but it happened in other countries, how we handle the masks, how we handle the tests, and now how we are handling the vaccines, where every country is doing it by themselves practically, and where we are forgetting a lot of countries who don't have access to the vaccines yet. So it's not one world, but it's everybody trying to survive with that. And as I was mentioning, is and that really struck me when David said, no, COVID is not the crisis, the lockdown is the crisis. And that's something that maybe you want to react. During the also interesting in the COVID trial crisis, is it about leadership in crisis, and is it about men against women? I mean, it's also something that has been reported that somehow the women-led countries in the first phases, at least of the crisis, have managed that much better than men who were either at war, who didn't take responsibility, who were in the different countries of the world. And something maybe to think about, what are the values of women, or the culture of women, or that make them better to face this crisis. And of course, there are some reactions which are very strong, and we can have similar decisions in terms of lockdown and how we reduce the freedom of people. But of course, in the way to implement these actions, there are very big differences. Although if you look at the one is in Africa, the other one is in India. In France, there was the same kind of images that we had seen. This is when the government officials said, we are going to do a lockdown, and you have 24 hours to go wherever you want to be locked down. So of course, everybody at this time went to try to for the next railway station to try to go home, or in France. We had really similar images, maybe with less people in all the stations in France. So let's open our discussion round. Hi guys. So Neil, I would like to start with you. I know that as quality and food safety leader of a big company, you have experienced a series of crises, and probably some of those that I mentioned impacted you in some way. What is for you the main points that organizations have to improve when they are in this crisis reaction time?
Yeah, I like your slides, Bruno, particularly the early one with the timeline. I can recognize how I felt and what I did in each of those events through 20 odd years. And particularly for me, the life-changing events. I can remember the dioxin issue in Belgium in '99. I had my own personal massive crisis inside Coke in 2004 when we withdrew Dasani from the UK. That was a big learning for me personally.
Yeah.
And then 2011, Japan with the tsunami and the Fukushima incident. And 2013, even with issues with Fonterra in New Zealand, China, and everywhere. So plenty of alignment there. But the things to consider, I think, are what you've already probably covered. Preparation. Learn from others. Again, like Melissa said as well earlier, look outside. One good thing that I was fortunate to do in the last couple of years with my team is visit NASA and look what they did and learn from them. You can always learn from other people. We visited Houston and watched the whole process and talked us through many events. Also about responsiveness, the speed to respond is also critical, and clear communication. I've got numerous personal examples of where people didn't communicate quickly enough, or they communicated too quickly. So you can do both ways. But that speed and agility has to be backed up by training and preparedness and simulations. One big thing that we were very big on in Coke is training the people, training the teams, collaborative, cross-functional teams from not just in operations, technical, marketing, public affairs, regulatory, everybody, so they know how to react when a crisis happens, because a crisis will happen when you're operating across so many countries. So really, it's how you respond and how people then are aware of the pressures and know what to do and do the right things.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say.
Okay, great, Neil. Thank you. Thank you very much. Melissa, I know that you are very sensitive and you speak a little bit about the role of people in such crises, and it's also maybe what we can see in such huge crises like the COVID, that some crises and they bring the best of some people and the worst of others. What do you think? What are the skills that a leader should show or should learn in order to be able to handle this crisis in a better way?
Yeah, some of the skills are natural abilities or natural aptitude, and a lot of them are learnable. But it really is skill set. And so talking about people, one of the crisis ready rules from the Institute is people above process and bottom line always. So successful business is built on relationships. Crisis is about doing right by those relationships when you're put to the test, when it matters most. So absolutely, crisis is about people. Talking about the different skill sets, empathy, emotional intelligence, calm. What I saw anyways, from my observations throughout COVID, especially at the beginning, was a fear. People, leaders, were not comfortable stepping into that space of leadership when they didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring. So we saw this reaction where leaders weren't comfortable talking for today when they knew that tomorrow was going to bring new information and maybe they'd have to retract. And that's not a comfortable space typically for a leader. So learning and training yourself, teaching yourself, learning the skills to be able to step into that space and lead your teams, your people, your constituents. What we saw throughout COVID again was this lack of leadership, so this void. And yet we saw this need where every single person needs a leader. Everybody was looking for a leader, and yet nobody was truly rising up to that space, into that void, to actually lead, because it was so uncomfortable, because it was so unpredictable, because it was so highly volatile and impactful. So learning to be comfortable within that discomfort and leading for the right reasons, leading with in accordance with your core values and the core values of your organization. That's always a guiding beacon to follow. And then the last thing that I'll say is another observation throughout COVID was you talked about women versus men.
Mhm.
There's a lot there that could be impacted. We could talk a whole hour just on that. But we saw, going back to this fear of stepping into that uncomfortable zone, there's a vulnerability that you need to be comfortable with stepping into. And I think that historically, leaders were seen, or at least were trained through society, to not be vulnerable, not to show vulnerability, right? To show that strength in that very hard surface. And what that does, especially today, is that removes your humanity. That makes you untrustworthy from the outside, and it makes you unrelatable. So being comfortable to step into that space, to lead through that space with empathy, with emotional intelligence, with reassurance, with calm, with true leadership, and to know that being vulnerable, being human, might be uncomfortable, and it might be scary, and it might be all these things, but it's also relatable and trustworthy, especially when those looking at you are feeling those same things. They want to know that you're also human, right? And they're going to follow that leader that they can relate to.
Yeah.
So I know that, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I was just going to say, I'm sure that David can add to that, and Neil can add.
Showing this vulnerability, actually, there is also a big question in all these issues that different governments have faced is, should we tell the truth when we know that there is uncertainty behind after it? And of course, it's better not. It's worse, in my opinion, not to know that people are not telling you the truth, because at the end it will always be known that it was a lie, and so it makes things even worse.
Well, and when I teach this, whether it's to students, whether it's to leaders, you can ask yourself the question: if you're faced with two leaders and one of them has that very hard shell external, you don't necessarily trust that, to your point, that they're telling you everything, but they're coming across as though they want to come across as though they are. And then on the other hand, you have a leader who is up there and being honest and saying, hey, here's what we know today. We know that tomorrow, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So we'll take tomorrow on when we get it, but here's what we're doing today, and here's why, and here's how, and here's, all of these factors. And then tomorrow comes along and they course correct in that same manner. Which leader do you want to follow? And then talking about your own leadership skills, which leader do you want to be?
Okay, great. Thank you, Melissa. And to come back to David on this round, as I said, you say that there is this crisis never happened with accident. You're quite harsh. I mean, when you say that there is always something that we've missed. There is a lack of anticipation of these foreseeable events in the company culture. And so, what can they do? These organizations, these countries, to really improve this crisis culture?
I think you go back to fundamental principles. You go, if in doubt, go back to fundamental principles. And I think that it is acceptance of responsibility. It's acceptance of responsibility. These are not random events. I just like to go back to a point Neil made about, if you do your training and your exercising and your simulations, and when a crisis happens, you know what to do. If you know what to do, it's not a crisis. I mean, that is the paradox of what we do. That if you have a plan and it works, that's not a crisis. And the reason that, for example, COVID is a crisis in terms of its impact, basically COVID is a very mid-level pandemic. It shouldn't have been that bad. But as an example, the official UK projections of deaths from a global pandemic in the UK, based on Mars and SIRS, was 250 people. They thought we're going to have 250 dead people. That's going to be a national pandemic. We've now hit over 100,000 people. So what happens is that whole planning, it's not that it doesn't quite work, it is absolutely overwhelmed. It is no longer fit for purpose. That is what a crisis is. And that goes to the points Melissa was making, that Neil was making. Because you can't know. There is no correct thing to do. And to come back to Melissa's point about communications, of course, there's always that balance, because if you wait longer, you have more information. If you have more information, you can make better decisions. and yet you have that pressure to make the decision, knowing that it is based on incomplete, partial information. So, for example, do we go into lockdown or do we not go into lockdown? Do we close airports? Do we not close airports? These are pretty significant issues. I'd just like to bring up the thing. I mean, you say that I'm harsh. I don't think I'm harsh.
No,
but one of the, I mean, something that you will recognize from my courses, because it's basically the first slide I put up when I start talking, and it's the last one I finish off. I'm just going to quote this. It's from 2003, academic work by Boyne and Hart, but it says, most man-made disasters and violent conflicts are preceded by incubation periods during which policymakers misinterpret, are ignorant of, or flat out ignore repeated indications of impending danger. And in almost every situation, it is absolutely repeated signals of impending danger, which are ignored. And the reason is, because the reasons you have a crisis is because inbuilt infrastructural systemic vulnerabilities. And therefore you have things that are repeating, they're just normalized and ignored. We should not have been unready for a global pandemic. I mean, according to your slide, we've had global pandemics every 2.5 years. That was God's gift to the risk manager. What is God's gift to the risk manager? A near miss. A near miss is your opportunity to say, right, let's get this right. But having said that, COVID-19 is a near miss. This is not the big, anybody who thinks this is a big one does not understand what a real pandemic looks like. If you took Ebola, which you had on your slide, which has a morbidity rate of 50%, which is the infection rate of COVID plus the morbidity rate of Ebola, then we'd be in trouble. So when you say, what can we do? We can accept the responsibility of learning from this, because all the things we learn from this is stuff we should have learned before. We're not going to learn anything new, but it's stuff that we should have taken on board. And just at my final point, there's a class of problems called wicked problems academically. These are wicked, non-rational crisis problems. And there's 10 principles of how you deal with that. With the first 9 are technical. But the 10th one, the 10th principle of wicked problems is the planner has no right to be wrong. Being wrong has consequences. You can't walk away from it. And so you say to governments, for example, we don't expect you to get everything right. But the things you should get right, don't get wrong. Don't get wrong that which you should not get wrong. Because if you do, that compounds a crisis. So I said, how do we do it both within corporations, within organizations, within society in general? Looking forward, we have to accept that there's a reality to this, and we have the responsibility, the moral responsibility of doing that which we need to do. And it's not magic and it's not voodoo. And you can't say we don't know. It's a matter of desire and ongoing and sustained commitment.
Thank you, David. When I say you're harsh, it's also a cultural thing. What I like it is straight to the point. So you said it's all about responsibility, and when you say if you have a plan and if you can manage it, it's not a crisis. That's also something very striking, because we are going to talk and we talk in the food safety management system about planning. A lot about planning, and the one of the most favorite items of Melissa is this this crisis handbook that is on the shelf, dusting, right? So let's look.
But wait, let's put context around that. The plan that's on the shelf, that sits stagnantly on the shelf, does nothing to serve.
Of course. Yeah.
It's not practical. It's not okay. It's currently still status quo. And those that had that plan at the beginning of COVID, hopefully today realize that how useless that is, unless you build that into the culture and you have the capability, you have the skill set. So just to put context around what you just said.
Of course. It was a
but if I can just take a moment to support what Melissa's saying, because it's not that doesn't have a purpose, but within the chaos and the chaos which me and Neil discussed, the chaos of a crisis, I've actually changed my whole understanding of this since COVID.
You don't have the time to read the procedures.
No, it's not that. It's the purpose. You're actually right. You don't have the time to read the procedures. The purpose of crisis management is not to manage a crisis. The purpose of crisis management, and the things that Neil talks about, the things that Melissa teaches and has been written right about, the purpose of crisis management and all of those things is to downgrade a crisis to a major incident, because a crisis is non-rational and a major incident is rational. And if you look at the countries of Southeast Asia that went through SARS in 2003, which is Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, because they've been through that, they recognized COVID and did all the things that Melissa talks about and Neil talks about. So COVID was the same, but their understanding it and their modeling of it and their engagement with it was different. That's the purpose, in my opinion, of good crisis management.
Great, thank you. Well, let's talk some minutes about crisis management itself and the tools that today exist around it. So we've talked about, is it a plan, PDCA approach, practice, plan, and prepare. We've talked a lot about preparation, decision making. We've talked about communication, and we've talked about also action, how we act, and we show accountability or responsibility in the way we do. I've taken the liberty with Melissa's authorization to take some of her crisis ready rules. And you mentioned one. My favorite is people above process and bottom line always. So you show when you are focused on the people, and that can get you are not wrong, because you really think about your consumers or the people in the country or your people, for the employees of the company. It will help you, of course. We talk about the fact that the most important thing is culture. So plans give you steps to follow, as you were saying. Programs strengthen your culture, and the captain is always responsible. Also, right? It's this part of the importance of the responsibility for this crisis. We've talked about standards, and we won't go through all of them, but there is an ISO standard, and Melissa, you're part of a commission also, or a work group about risk management, strategic risk management. What we see is that the standard, the 31,000 standard, which is about risk, it puts the value creation and protection at the center, with leadership on one hand, and also the systems at the other side. So it's not about the system; it's really about the meaning of what we do, and why we do that to create value and protect it. And there are a lot of when I did this overview, that a lot of these standards have been reviewed as in the 2018, 2019, as if the world was knowing that something was missing. And it's about resilience, emergency management, business continuity, and also what I like is guidelines to support vulnerable persons, which also are important in COVID times. In terms of GFSI benchmark standards, or the food safety standards, if you do a sum up of all of them, you talk about addressing risk opportunities, understand the need and expectation of interested parties, how you handle quality issues, or what we could call incidents, your crisis management plan, and this is something that is part of the system culture. You have to have a plan and to audit it. There are incident management procedure, product recall procedure, which is the one of the effects of the results of the incident management. Decision-making process. Of course, we should have a team. Alert contact list, know who to alert, communication plan, and we should test the procedure. And of course, it's Neil mentioned about simulation. That's part of the other things that we really need to improve. And maybe a last point, last presentation about the transparency with the stakeholders. And when you do this risk assessment and you work on your system, you need to really to integrate all the stakeholders, and all the stakeholders are important. So you need to know them. You need to engage with them also, not in time of crisis, but before, in normal times, if you want to have good relations with them. And maybe I want to mention one point, because as well for crisis management, then for food safety culture, insurance company who are helping to manage what is not manageable somehow for companies, they can be a very good support for the companies. They fund trainings. They give support to help you go through this crisis. So to come back to our panel for the last round. So what are, and I would like to talk with Melissa. I've quoted you in this slide. Can you tell us, for you, what are really the key aspects of this crisis management? I mean, we've obviously talked already about some of them, but is preparation the most important of all?
I'm going to call it readiness, because crisis ready. And what crisis ready is, to me, to the work that I do, is, so David opened up the conversation by saying, basically, crisis readiness is cultural. That's 100% factual. And that's the focus. So if you look at, is preparedness what's essential? What's in preparedness, what's within that readiness is three things. It's mindset, that speaks to culture, that speaks to leadership, that speaks to the values of the organization, that speaks to how things are implemented and acted on a daily basis and rewarded and all of these things. It's skill set, which you asked earlier. We talked about leadership skills, communication skills, operational skills for crisis management. So it's skill set, honing and fine tuning and learning the skill set, which is 100% learnable for the most part. And then capability to serve and support the mindset and the skill set. So in capability, we have processes, we have procedures, we have programs, we have just looking at communication. Communication is a huge aspect of successful crisis management. To successfully manage a crisis, you need to take both the right actions and communications, and both need to happen simultaneously and really, really strong. You can't successfully manage a crisis without one of these things, or without both of these things, I should say. Just communication alone, a lot of consultants or a lot of professionals will go and they'll create a crisis communication plan. And so they're going to draft, hopefully they're going to think of communication strategy and stakeholders and all of these things, but they're going to forget, and this is what I see far too often, is the capability to support that. So what's the approval process? How does that look, and how is that realistic? And how do you make sure you're not bottlenecking? What's the internal dissemination process? How does it flow? How does communication flow throughout the organization so that you can effectively communicate internally and externally? So crisis readiness, to sum it up, is cultural. And in order to be cultural, it takes the right mindset. It takes the right skill set, which is, we're talking about simulations. Neil keeps talking about simulations. That's an integral part of integrating it within your culture, right? Is testing and honing and testing the capabilities and honing the skill set. So mindset, skill set, capability to support both.
Great summary. Thank you, Melissa. Neil, in this simulation or preparation, how important for you is media training? Is it something that you did as a food safety quality director?
Yes, we did. I do think it's really critically important. I just want to go back to a couple of points because I've been silent there while the others. I really like the point that Melissa made about authentic leadership. I think that's also critical. From practical experience of when you don't have all the facts and you can't communicate because you're unsure you might get it wrong, you've still got to communicate. Because if you don't, it's going to be a disaster and people won't trust you and you'll lose your brand trust. You've got to say, if you don't know, you communicate, you don't know, and we're working on it. But lack of communication destroys the trust in the company and the leadership. So authentic leadership, and the other one she just mentioned as well is also critical. Melissa mentioned communicating up and down. One challenge that we often had in Coke is managing an event that maybe happened in India. How do you manage a localized event without, as we used to say in Atlanta, the corporate seagulls arriving on the jets to fly in to go and solve the problem for you? So that's one thing you don't want to happen. But you've got to communicate the local communication, who know the practicalities of the event and manage it locally, connected it into the global communication. This is also a critical issue in big companies. It's hard to manage because you're going to get local reporter, local TV coming to that site looking for an answer or a story, and it needs to align. And people often say the wrong thing, and then you're on the back foot already. But practice. Simulation, I'll say it again. One thing, you introduced me to it recently, Bruno, I'll give you the credit. Conductor, the tool we've seen from a UK-based company, I've talked to them recently. fantastic simulation scenario tool. I think David, I'm sure, is aware of it as well, that the military are using it and practicing. And I would recommend people to look at that because it's a very useful tool for simulating. But as well in Coke, we have very few incidents, fortunately, because we practice, we train, we make it become part of your job for those teams so they understand how to manage. And that's critical about that. Rehearsing, practicing, it becomes second nature.
Sorry. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Neil. Maybe for you, sorry, Melissa, you want to? I cannot hear you, Melissa.
Sorry, can I just add something to what Neil said, which I think is really strong? In order to do that, when you're looking at all of the multitude of communications that need to happen, making sure that you have, when we talked earlier about that cross-functional support and collaboration internally. So while you're looking at your communication processes and strategies and just all of these things externally and internally, making sure, far too often we see that crisis management is approached in a vacuum, and it can't be. Crisis impacts the entire organization. It needs to be a collaborative cross-organizational event. And in order to achieve what Neil just said, which is critical to be able to achieve, you need to have that support. You need everybody internally to understand the roles and responsibilities, no matter what they are. They all have roles and responsibilities in a crisis. And you need to facilitate the capability, the capacity to communicate internally on a regular basis in a manner that's efficient, an efficient manner. So just to kind of add to that internally, what that has to look like in order to achieve that.
Thank you, Melissa. Maybe the last word for you, David. I learned one definition that I didn't knew before. It was resilience, which is the second big word, I think, of 2020 after you were on mute, one of the most spoken words. How can we improve this resilience of the organization, so that this willingness or to thrive after a crisis and not only to come back to normal?
It's a good question, and it's a question where I think it's at the heart of all of our things. Just to come back to something Neil said about the message, Tony Hayward. Tony Hayward is the two words that scare everybody. Of course, the CEO of BP, who live on American TV, when asked if he's going to sort out Deepwater Horizon, says, yes, because I want to get my life back and go sailing with my son. 16 words and lost $60 billion, the most expensive 16 words in the history of humanity. I think resilience comes back to everything we've all discussed. I'm sure what I love about what Neil says and Melissa says is word for word what I talk about. I think we're all talking about the same thing. But for resilience is about two things: change and stress. If you don't have change, you don't have stress. You don't need resilience. As we're moving now 2021 into 2025, the nature of the threats we're facing, we are going to a crisis-rich environment. The crises of 2025, and certainly the technology we will use to engage with that, do not yet exist. Those do not exist. And so resilience is absolutely about what we need to do to create a capability. And if I would say it is two things, it is one, sensitivity to your environment. Be sensitive to your environment. Be aware of what's happening. If you block yourself off, then you can't be resilient. And the second thing is to come back to what we've all spoken about. You have to be a learning organization if you embed that. Because resilience, people misunderstand it. Resilience is not what happens after an event to survive. Resilience is what you do in order to become able to, that Darwinian survivability, to adapt to your environment. And then it complete the loop. It's about culture. It's about the question at this stage. That's my final word. The questions we're asking is not what do we need to do, but what sort of organization do we think we need to become? What does a 21st century risk-sensitive, crisis-ready organization look like? And I think that's a fundamental question at the heart of the work that all of us are doing. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Melissa, for this this time. I hope it was great learning. It was great to discuss this topic with you. I would say to our audience, they can post on the LinkedIn feed and YouTube feed questions, and I'm sure that the four of us will answer the questions that are addressed to them.
Just maybe let me finish by showing some of the connection possibility that you have with for the four of us. I really recommend the book from Melissa. It's really a great learning tool. And you have also the coming trainings of David, which are free. There's are incredible material which are free. And so thank you all for your time. And I hope to see you very soon live. Bye all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Bruno, for bringing us together and being able to share this.
Bye.